I just would like to do a quick introduction of Alice here. And Alice, I wanted to ask you this a moment ago. Sebrell, is that how you pronounce it? Okay. Um, so Alice Sebrell is a native of Charleston, South Carolina. Charlotte, North Carolina, and she earned her BFA from the University of Delaware and her MFA in photography from the Savannah College of Art and Design. She has written and spoken about Black Mountain College for multiple publications and gatherings and has curated many exhibitions during her time at the museum. She's joining us today from Black Mountain College Museum and Art Center in Asheville, North Carolina. And so please welcome Alice Sebrell for your art break today. Thanks.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. Who said that? Thank you. So we have a small group, so feel free to just raise your hand and ask questions anytime throughout the presentation. So today we're going to talk about the history of Black Mountain College, but since you have a lot of women of Black Mountain College artists in your current exhibition, we'll try to focus in on a few of those throughout the presentation. So let's get started. Black Mountain College was founded in 1933. It was founded by this man, John Andrew Rice. Rice had been a classics professor at Rollins College in Florida, and he was basically fired because he and the president of Rollins College did not get along at all. At the time, Rollins was a very progressive liberal arts college, and Rice was very idealistic and had some strong opinions about progressive education and, in particular, a liberal arts college. So in 1933, Rice and some colleagues opened Black Mountain College at this facility, which is called, at the time was called Robert E. Lee Hall, at the Blue Ridge Assembly on the outskirts of Black Mountain, North Carolina. The idea of Black Mountain College was to always remain small, to be experimental, and yes, to be a liberal arts college, so to have as full a range of subjects as possible, but within that small size, it wasn't always possible to have as broad a range as you might have at a university today. The other very central idea was that the arts would be at the center of this liberal arts education. So here you see the landscape surrounding the Blue Ridge Assembly, very beautiful. The town of Black Mountain is kind of in the valley between the mountains that you see and this point of view of the camera. And here you see the founding faculty of Black Mountain College. As you can see, it's a small group. John Rice is on the far right on the bottom. But none of these individuals in the photograph were really art teachers or experts on art. So Rice and his co-founders asked around to people that they knew who would be the appropriate person to lead the art department at Black Mountain College. Rice was a classics professor, so art was way out of his world. And the last person that they contacted about this was Philip Johnson, the architect and curator of architecture at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And Philip Johnson said, here, I can tell you exactly the person that you need to lead your art program. It's Joseph Albers. Joseph Albers, pictured in this newspaper photograph from 1933, and his wife Annie were previously at the Bauhaus School of Art and Design in Germany. Very famous, very influential school. But the Bauhaus had just been closed because of Hitler's rise to power. So here's the Bauhaus was founded in 1919. It closed in 1933 under threat from the Nazis. And the Nazis wanted to take over control of the Bauhaus. The faculty said, no, we're not going to allow that. We would rather close than allow you to take control. So suddenly, a lot of very, very gifted and smart, talented people had no job. One of those people was Joseph Albers, and another was his wife, Annie Albers, pictured here. Now, Annie was a textile artist, but she was also Jewish, so it was critically important for her to get out before bad things happened. So Joseph and Annie came to Black Mountain College. Well, first they were contacted by the new leaders of Black Mountain, invited to come, and Albers, and this was by telegram, Albers wrote back that he was extremely interested in coming. However, there was a problem because he really didn't speak English well at all, had very little command of English. They said, "We think you're the right person, please come on." And so Joseph and Annie came across the Atlantic Ocean by boat. They landed in New York, and then here you can see this photograph from the Asheville Citizen-Times. Germans on faculty at Black Mountain School. Just give us a little bit of a window into kind of the climate, political climate of the time. So Joseph led the art program, and Annie led the weaving workshop at Black Mountain College. And of course, in your current exhibition on loan from the Johnson collection, you have a work by Annie Albers. Here we see some pictures of students at work. And then this is a loom that came from the weaving workshop at Black Mountain College after the college closed. It was given to our collection at Black Mountain College Museum and Art Center. Here's Joseph in the classroom. You'd probably have to say that Joseph Albers was the single most influential teacher at Black Mountain College. After Black Mountain, he ended up at Yale leading their design program and just influenced hundreds and hundreds of students. These are some of the paper studies that were executed in the design workshop. Albers taught color, design, and something called matière, which is working with materials. And here you can see a theater performance called Spectrodrama, and I think it's just interesting to look back at these color studies and then look at these costumes that were created for this theater performance. 1937, Black Mountain College, directed by Zanti Shawinski, who's another European refugee who came to Black Mountain. He had also been at the Bauhaus. And another theater performance called The Danse Macabre from 1938. I think you get a sense or a flavor of the experimental avant-garde nature of Black Mountain College through these images of theater. But they also had a very active music program. This is on the porch of the Blue Ridge Assembly, where if the weather was nice, everyone would come outside. And then Saturday night dancing. They always had interesting parties, let's say. Sometimes they were costume parties on Saturday night. Other times they would just be a dance with live music. And then one more picture of the Blue Ridge Assembly. You can see it was a very large facility and really larger than the college needed. When they were at Blue Ridge, they rented because in the very founding years, they didn't have funding to purchase a property or build a facility, so they needed a ready-made campus. Eventually, well, one of the problems with that was that they were unable to have summer programs, so they were only there spring, fall, and winter. And then at the end of the spring term, they had to pack up all of their belongings, put them in storage, and go away for the summer, and then come back and sort of restart, pull everything out of storage and restart, which is kind of an interesting way to have a college be structured because you're starting anew every year and there's an active process of renewal. However, Joseph Albers wanted to have summer programs, and they also began to be concerned that their lease would not be renewed at Blue Ridge. So they began to scout around the area, and they located 600 acres of land on the other side of the Swannanoa Valley, still on the outskirts of Black Mountain. and they made arrangements to purchase the property, which had been developed in the early 20th century, in the 19 teens, by E.W. Grove. He was a developer. He built a massive hotel called the Grove Park Inn, which is still used in Asheville, and a shopping area called the Grove Arcade, and a housing development called Grovemont. So they had some buildings in place, but they didn't have this large single building that could work as a classroom building and faculty offices and so forth. So they got in touch with their friend Walter Gropius, the architect and founder of the Bauhaus. And Gropius and his partner Marcel Breuer created this plan for the property. As you can see, there's a small lake. It's called Lake Eden. It's still there. And they were going to build this large, very Bauhaus-looking complex of buildings. Here's a model of it you can see. Well, this was in the early 1940s, late 1930s, early 1940s. It would have been a massive fundraising venture to raise the money to build this structure. And they were really unable to do that. Part of the issue was the build-up to World War II. Money was scarce, and so were materials. And so they approached a different architect, an American architect named Lawrence Coker. Coker designed this plan that you see, kind of wings coming off a central hub or spokes off a wheel. And so that one of the directives they gave to Coker was to please design something that the Black Mountain College community could build, faculty and students, or could participate in building. And so it was a much simpler structure. And here you see the students leaving the Blue Ridge Assembly. They loaded up the college work truck and went across the valley, and then spent about a year and a half constructing the studies building. They rerouted a stream, which you see here, working in the mud and the muck. They mixed cement and harvested stones and timber from the property. They held summer work camps to bring outsiders in who were interested in that sort of practical construction. And here you see the studies building under construction. It's a large building, still stands, and you can see their students working there. It was an ambitious project. Here you see the completed studies building, and this beautiful photograph from the other side of Lake Eden showing the studies building. It's a large building, and I believe my information is that it was the first building of the international style of architecture built in the United States. So here's another view of the Lake Eden campus. It shows the kind of the natural landscape surrounding the lake with the studies building in the background. They continued to do building projects. It was very much of a DIY ethos. If you can dream up an idea and you can figure out how to implement it, you had the permission to go do that. They had a very active work program at Black Mountain College. Everyone was expected to participate in that work program. So the building program was part of that. And this is a barn that's under construction. One of the things that they were able to do upon having their own campus and property that they really felt invested in and committed to was to begin to have summer programs. So this photograph shows a panel discussion underway in the summer of 1944. Summer of 1944 is very important at Black Mountain College. For years, they had been having discussions about integrating. The college had been diverse, both in faculty and student body, from its very beginning because of the European refugees that came over under threat of Hitler. There were Japanese Americans on campus. They had yet to integrate, to invite African Americans to be part of the college community. This photograph, which is impossible to read, but it shows the number of refugees who came to Black Mountain College in the 1930s. And so they had always had African Americans on the staff working in the kitchen, but had not yet reached out to invite anyone to join the student body. Of course, this is in the Jim Crow South, could be dangerous for not only the college campus and community, but for an African American student to come to rural Western North Carolina at that time. But they made the decision after the students created a petition that they presented to the faculty. They made a decision to invite the first African American student to come the summer of 1944. And this is Alma Stone, first African American student at Black Mountain College, summer of 1944, 10 years before Brown versus Board of Education. Very important and I would say courageous move by the college. It was such a successful experiment, we'll call it. Good for Alma. She was a music student from Atlanta. She had graduated from Spelman College and had dreams of going to Juilliard. So coming to Black Mountain College for the Summer Music Institute was a step prior to going to Juilliard. The success of that summer opened up the possibility of broadening the initiative. This is a singer named Roland Hayes who came and performed at the 1945 summer session. They also had African American students, both a male and a female, that summer. And so the effort to integrate and to diversify the student body continued. In 1949, Langston Hughes came and read his poetry and worked with students. And then 49 and 52, these two Indian, Pravina and Vashi, came to teach dance, Hindu dance practices. 1946, this is a really famous photograph, and you can see the diversity on the faculty. On the far left is Leo Amino, a Japanese American. Next to him, Jacob Lawrence, the painter, and a few people over. Gwendolyn Knight Lawrence. Gwendolyn is represented in the exhibition here. Up in the tree is Jean Varda. He's a Greek American. Nancy Newhall at the bottom of the tree. Walter Gropius, the architect mentioned earlier, is the gentleman in the white suit with the bow tie. And then over on the far right, Joseph and Annie Albers. And here's a picture of Jacob and Gwendolyn Knight Lawrence from that summer of 1946. Jacob Lawrence upstairs. So lots of times people don't recognize or understand the link to Black Mountain College through a lot of these important 20th century artists, and it's kind of amazing. This is Mary Parks. She became Mary Parks Washington, another student from the 1946 summer session. And this is one of Mary Parks' collages from that summer. I love it. It's called Dancing Girl. She had a wonderful time at Black Mountain that summer, particularly working with Jean Varda, the painting instructor. And here's Mary Parks Washington. In 2013, we brought her to Asheville to lead a workshop for us, for our museum. Ruth Asawa, very, very well-known artist these days. She was a Black Mountain College student in the 40s. Her family had spent time in internment camps in Arkansas and in California. She went to, her goal was to become a teacher, so she went to Teachers College in Minneapolis, but she was unable to complete the requirements for her degree because Japanese students were not allowed to student teach, so she couldn't graduate. She came to Black Mountain College, flourished, studied under Joseph Albers and others, and her work is spectacular. This is a piece she did using the laundry stamp, the BMC, Black Mountain College laundry stamp. She turned it into a tool to create a design. And then here's a work from our collection, which you may be familiar with her wire sculptures. They're just outstanding. She began working with wire as a material after taking a trip to Mexico. and seeing the Mexican women creating egg baskets out of wire. She came back to Black Mountain College, and suddenly an egg basket became a sculptural form. Summer of 1948, probably one of the most well-known summers of the college's history. John Cage, composer and musician, was on the faculty. That was his first summer at Black Mountain. Merce Cunningham, the dancer and choreographer, was on the faculty. Artist Willem de Kooning came to teach painting. And he and his wife Elaine is represented in your exhibition, came down from New York. Willem had just had his first one-man show, solo exhibition at the Egan Gallery, and had sold absolutely nothing. So they were facing a hot summer in New York with dim prospects for money or for work. And then this invitation to come to Black Mountain College came through, and they were happy to come. Willem created one painting that summer at Black Mountain, and this is it, and it's called Asheville. And he had a student named Pat Pasloff, who is in the exhibition. This work called Yardstick, which is a beautiful painting, is in your exhibition. I think you can see that she was under the influence of her teacher, but she struck out after she got out from under that strong influence. Everyone was influenced by de Kooning eventually. She forged her own path, and here's a photograph of Pat in her studio in 2010. We had a Pat Pasloff exhibition shortly after this photograph. So back to Elaine de Kooning. She flourished in the Black Mountain College community. She really had the freedom because Willem was invited to teach. Elaine was on her own. So she just jumped into every single activity that was possible. Here you can see her with Merce Cunningham seated and a student named William Schrager in a play that was directed by Arthur Penn, who you may know as the director of Bonnie and Clyde. It was called The Ruse of Medusa. And Elaine also painted that summer. She created 18 paintings on paper that are really spectacular. They show, I think, the influence of Joseph Albers, whose classes she attended. But she also really fell under the spell of this person, Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller was invited to teach for the first time that summer of 1948. He was a replacement for an architect named Bertrand Goldberg. And Fuller arrived at the college with this travel. Did you have a question?
No, I'm
You're stretching. Okay. He showed up at the college with a travel trailer full of all of these geometric models that you can see. This is his classroom at Black Mountain College. And his goal that summer was to build a full-scale dome that would replicate this small model in the foreground. So all of the college community got involved. They were excited about this project. He was one of those people who could get up on a stage and speak for hours and never run out of things to say or ideas. So he captivated the imagination of the college community. And they spent weeks working to assemble this large-scale version of the small dome in the foreground. There was a problem, though, because Fuller could only afford Venetian blind remnant strips, which is what you see stretched out in the field there. So they did all the mathematical calculations. They bolted them all together, and the dream was when that last bolt goes in place, the dome will rise. That did not happen, however. And it became known as the supine dome because it just laid flat and supine on the ground. But Fuller said, it doesn't matter, I knew it wasn't going to work. I always learn more from my mistakes than from my successes. And here he is the very next summer, 1949, popping out of the dome that was created successfully. 1949, yes. I'm sorry? They are not, unfortunately. 1949, the very next year after this incredibly successful summer session, Joseph and Annie Albers and some other key faculty members left. there was a constant conflict at Black Mountain College in that small, insular, creative community. Differences of opinion arose all the time. There were personality conflicts. It sometimes is thought of as a utopia, and I think in some ways it was a utopia, but a utopia doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't any problems. There were problems. There were ideological conflicts, and I think they were tired of being poor and cold in the winter and maybe not having as much food to eat as they were interested in. So 1949, they left. And this is Joseph in the classroom. So this created a bit of a vacuum, but it also opened up some opportunities. And one of those opportunities was to bring in, to build a pot shop, which is what you see in the image, and to have a program teaching clay. So they brought the clay artist Robert Turner down from Alfred, New York, built this pot shop, and began to offer classes in clay and working with clay, making pottery and so forth. On the screen you see MC Richards. She was on the BMC faculty. She came to teach reading and writing, as she called it, but we might say English literature, creative writing. But she was also introduced to clay through Robert Turner's presence at the college, and this was a plate that she made, fish plate. That's something that we have in our collection. In your exhibition here today, you have work by this artist, Karen Carnes, who was a very important potter. She and her husband, David Weinrib, came to Black Mountain College in 1952 to teach and to be resident potters. And they stayed there for a couple of years. And I think really in terms of the studio pottery movement, which was really just at that time just being born, Carnes and Weinrib's presence at Black Mountain College and the work that they did there and the teaching that they did was a very important factor in studio pottery. Here's a cup and saucer that Karen Carnes made at Black Mountain College. Another artist in your exhibition is Susan Weil. She came to Black Mountain College in the fall of 1948 with Robert Rauschenberg, who was her husband. And of course, you probably heard of Robert Rauschenberg. You may not have heard so much about Susan Weil, which is often the way from that era where the male figure received the accolades and the celebrity, and the woman worked in the shadow of the famous husband. So Susan and Robert Rauschenberg were there off and on from that fall of 48 to about 1953. They got married, they had a son, Christopher, and then there was trouble in the marriage. Robert realized he was gay and took up with Cy Twombly, and suddenly Susan's domestic life was actually falling apart. This is a piece that she did at Black Mountain called Secrets. It's her journal or her diary ripped up into pieces and turned into a collage. But I think if you kind of read some of these little fragments, you get a sense of some of the things that she was facing. This is just a pause. Dance class in the dining hall at Black Mountain College. And then here's Elizabeth Schmidt-Jenner-John, a student at Black Mountain. She's represented in your exhibition. She's one of these figures at Black Mountain who did everything. She danced, she worked in the weaving workshop, she painted. She and her husband Pete created the Light Sound Movement workshops, which were these interdisciplinary workshops where the students came together and just had kind of like a brainstorming session, and one idea would sort of surface as the best one at the moment. And these were for performances, and so then they would marshal whatever kind of resources they needed to actually put this performance on. And Light Sound Movement workshop. This is a weaving that she did at Black Mountain College in 1949 called Cross. There's so many women associated with Black Mountain College that chances are you've never heard of. This is a dancer named Catherine Litz doing the glyph dance, summer of 1951 at Black Mountain. She was on the faculty for 2 summers, 51 and 52. And here's another photograph of Catherine Litz. Jo Sandman came to Black Mountain College summer of 1951. That was the only time she was there. She was a painting student. She came and got to study with Robert Motherwell and Ben Shahn, who were both there that summer. And this is a painting she created just right after her time at Black Mountain College. And I know you have a Jo Sandman painting in your exhibition. Another rather unsung hero from Black Mountain College is Hazel Larson Archer. She came as a student and then excelled in photography, particularly that summer of 1948, that she was invited to be an instructor of photography. And this is a self-portrait she did. But many of the photographs that we've seen in this presentation were made by Hazel. She's sort of like the person who documented and made portraits of the college community for the longest period of time. And she had a really singular vision, beautiful, beautiful work, and doesn't get the recognition, again, that I think she deserves. So just a quick overview of the college now, just to kind of think about the closing of the college. Why did that happen? Well, the title of this presentation alludes to radical visions in both art, living, education, and community. And the college was actually, it did have some radical visions, and it was a place where all people were welcome. It was an inclusive place. So that meant ideas, that meant sexual practices, living practices, artistic practices. And so, of course, it popped on the radar of the FBI as a place where suspicious activity might be taking place. The college was visited by the FBI on multiple occasions. Some of its figures were investigated. This particular report was written up about Ben Shahn. It was thought that communists and communism were taking root at Black Mountain. And so that was one of the problems that were encountered in the final years of the college. The departure of the Alberses was huge. It created a leadership vacuum. Took a couple of years to sort of recover their footing after that. And then the GI Bill following World War II ended, and that had been a really important way that they got increased student enrollment. The highest enrollment at any time at Black Mountain College was barely over 100. Over its 24-year lifetime, it had 1,200 total students. Many of those didn't graduate. There were approximately 60 students who actually graduated from Black Mountain. But even now, the college is legendary and famous. So things like graduation are not necessary for success in life. Anyway, with all of these factors coming together in the 1950s and a lack of really strong leadership and fundraising capacity, the college's leader at the time is the man in the center of this photograph with the glasses. His name was Charles Olson. He was a poet and not a really good administrator or fundraiser. And so after a few years of shrinking enrollment, selling off part of the property to try to raise money to hang on a little bit longer, they made the decision to close the college in 1956. And this photograph was taken to sort of commemorate the closing party on that evening. So you can see how small the college got at the very end. And I think we're right at 40 minutes, and I believe that's my last slide. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I thank you all for being here. John Rice, he did leave. He was asked to leave because he had an affair with a student. Very charismatic, he was a provocateur. He liked to engage in the Socratic method, and so he would challenge people just to get the dialogue going. But he was, I guess you could say, a difficult person at times. Hi.
Thank you, that was great. I'm just curious, since you're working with the community, what do you think the impact or kind of legacy has been of Black Mountain College on the community there? Is it still like kind of felt as a presence even though it's been many decades since it closed?
Yes, well, our museum, Black Mountain College Museum and Art Center, I think is a very tangible representation of the legacy. We were founded in 1993. I know some people, particularly in the art world, but not exclusively, once they realize, oh, this is where Black Mountain College was, they feel a stronger connection to the place and its artistic legacy. Asheville is a kind of a liberal community, and certainly Black Mountain College was a liberal community. I don't know if you can make a direct link between the two, but I think the reputation of Black Mountain College as this sort of vibrant, artistic experience, and all of the famous artists who came through Black Mountain College, either as students or faculty, is part of that story, if that makes sense. The studies building is still there, yeah. We're doing walking tours of the Lake Eden campus in the spring and the fall. In the summertime, it's a boys' camp. It's been a boys' camp ever since Black Mountain College closed. It even overlapped in the final couple of years of the college as they sold off the lower campus and kind of gathered up at the upper campus. The boys' camp and the college coexisted for a while, and that's called Camp Rockmont, and it still is in existence and still going as a summer camp. And yeah, we're doing, like once a month, we're doing walking tours of the campus to allow people, understandably, there's a great deal of interest in actually going there in person, going through the buildings, seeing the lake and the studies building, and it's just important to visit a place, sort of be a pilgrim for a morning. Our website is blackmountaincollege.org, and if you go to the visit header, in the menu at the top of the homepage, there's a drop-down menu, and you'll see information about how to sign up. If you don't see it, just send us an email. Oh, nice. It is gorgeous, yeah. There's a music festival that takes place there twice a year called the Leaf Festival. It's also used for other sorts of things. But we're happy. We have a great relationship with the ownership of both properties, actually. But there's more interest in the Lake Eden campus than the Blue Ridge Assembly campus. Yes? Joseph Albers was the wow. There's a famous internationally known artist, and he attracted students. They wanted to work with him. A lot of the names that we now think of as super famous were not famous at the time. Cajun Cunningham were not famous. Willem de Kooning was not famous. As I said, he had just had a solo exhibition and sold nothing. Rauschenberg was certainly not famous. lot of people thought he was kind of not serious person, let's say, that he was kind of frivolous and sort of a jokester. Of course, Robert Rauschenberg is one of the most famous artists of the 20th century now. Franz Klein taught at Black Mountain College, but the abstract expressionist movement was really in its early phases then, in the late 40s, early 50s. So Klein and Jack Torkov taught, Motherwell taught 2 different summers, and Ben Shahn was just there the one summer. So all of these figures who we now think of as very, very famous artists and figures in the 20th century really weren't that, except for Joseph Albers at the time. But that doesn't mean that they weren't excellent teachers or adventurous artists doing work that really was distinctive, innovative, adventurous, all that.
I had overheard when it came in early before the presentation, which this has been wonderful, but that it was going to be recorded. Is there a way that we can listen to this again or others?
Wilson probably has the answer to that question.
Recording, I had heard that this was being
Yes,
recorded.
yes, it was recorded, so we'll have that up on the website, within the next, under the next few days.
And also the slideshow, is that proprietary material, or would that be attached to the
That would
sound
be part of
recording?
the, presentations.
That's great.
Any other thoughts or questions?
Rice was African American.
No, he was not. No, he was not.
It for the picture, which is why I couldn't understand why there was one.
Right. No, he was a Southern white man. Yeah. He was definitely not African. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he wrote a book called I Came Out of the 18th Century. And then there's an autobiography, and then there's a biography of John Rice called Visions and Vanity, which was written by Catherine Chaddock, which is a great book. So Rice was, somebody said the word mercurial. He definitely was. He was a visionary. He had a vision for this very small liberal arts college. There were some other factors that I didn't really get into, but they set Black Mountain College apart from almost every other college that I'm aware of, in that it was important that there be no controlling, like, board of trustees or policy-making board. The faculty of the college owned and operated it. They didn't want any sort of overarching authority telling them what to do, what to teach, what books were acceptable or not acceptable, anything like that. So that was important. And then also, grades were not given to the students. The students were given control over their own education. That was supremely important. Some students weren't ready for that amount of freedom, but it was baked into the DNA of the college, is that you would succeed or fail on your own terms. You had the freedom to go to class or not go to class. You're not going to see a grade for this class. They did keep grades just for transcripts and things like that. But nonetheless, with all of this freedom, the reputation of the college was exemplary. And when students from Black Mountain wanted to transfer to, say, MIT or Harvard or Yale, they never had any trouble because the reputation of the college was sterling. So that's, that may be counterintuitive, but it's how it was. And I think what the lesson in that is that when we as humans are given that amount of freedom and responsibility, we can really step up to the challenge. We can fall flat on our face, but we own that failure, just like Buckminster Fuller and his dome. Yeah, it didn't work, but hey, what did we learn in the process? But yeah, I think it's a lesson, a useful lesson for the times we're in today. trust people, give them some freedom and control over their own lives. Anybody else? Thank you. Thanks, everybody.